May the joy of Easter be with you. We're in the octave of Easter. The church uses what it calls octaves, or 8 days, to extend the celebration of important feasts. And since we cannot possibly express all the joy we feel at the resurrection of our Lord in a single day, we have the entire octave with which to celebrate. Have you ever had great news to share, unbelievably good news, and you couldn't wait to tell someone, only they weren't around, so you had to go find them, getting more and more excited until you could finally tell them the news? That must have been how Mary Magdalene and the other Mary felt when they found the stone rolled away where our Lord was buried. Fearful yet overjoyed is how the gospel put it. Fearful because they just had an encounter with a divine messenger, yet overjoyed at the news and message he told them to deliver. The Lord is risen. Fearful perhaps because of how they thought the apostles might react, how the Jewish authorities would react, for surely they were going to find out. Even so, they were anxious to accomplish the task given them by the angel. And that is a key observation about this gospel passage. They were fearful and overjoyed, but even so, they set out to accomplish their mission. And as you will recall, that is when they met Jesus. If out of fear they hadn't done what the angel told them, if they hadn't gone to deliver the message, they would have missed Jesus. It's curious, isn't it? If we search for Jesus where we expect to find him, he isn't there. The women expected to find him in the tomb, but he had risen. And yet when they met Jesus, as the gospel said, on the way. The way, what way? The way of obedience and faith. The way of obedience and faith, of course. It was through obedience and faith that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary met our Lord on the way of faith, a faith that carried them beyond their fear. Their faith was real. It was authentic. It was personal. And no matter who we are, where we're from, or when we happen to live, we always admire and respect authentic people. People who live out what they believe, who are confident in the face of opposition, who are resolute in their unwillingness to compromise their core principles, and yet are also eager and willing to share why they believe what they believe. You probably know people like that. People who you may even profoundly disagree with for whatever reason, for their politics or maybe their theology, yet you admire them for the strength of their convictions. Authentic people are not necessarily outspoken or readily noticed, though they might be. But whether they are or not, they have a presence about them. We see an example of this in Peter after our Lord's resurrection, as he spoke to the massive crowd from people from all corners of the earth who were in Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost. What had changed in Peter? Before the resurrection, he was a tall, quivering mass of jello, quaking at the accusations of a young girl at even knowing Jesus. Now he was speaking boldly, not less at risk for being arrested by the chief priests since Jesus' crucifixion, but more at risk. What had changed? Well, Jesus rose from the dead, obviously. Peter was emboldened by our Lord's mighty display of power over death, and you'll get no argument from me on that account. Yes. But in fact, I would go even further and state with St. Paul and the whole company of saints, if Jesus had not risen from the dead, then we are the most pitiable and pathetic of people on earth. For we have no hope for our own salvation. Our faith is in vain. But Jesus has risen from the dead. And so I agree that bolstered Peter's confidence so he could boldly speak of his faith where before he cowered. Now he was eager to risk falling into the mighty power of the Pharisees or even the Romans, whereas before he ran from a young girl. But I would also submit that it was not just the glory of the resurrection that transformed Peter. For the resurrection, as glorious as it was but a manifestation of God's love for an unworthy sinner like Peter, like you, like me. And besides, there were many who were not transformed like Peter was. No, Peter's transformation was also due to his realization, his decision, his conscious act to love Jesus like Jesus loved him, no matter what the cost. To sacrifice all for Jesus just as Jesus had sacrificed all for him. Peter acted out of love for our Lord. Sometimes, though, we can come to feel our Lord is distant at times. Perhaps the resurrection joy has gone. Perhaps fear about our circumstances seems to dominate our lives. Well, then perhaps we've strayed onto a different path, a path where we've forgotten about faith. But without faith, it's impossible to please God. So let us then, in the joy of Easter, move beyond our fear and choose the way of obedience and faith. If we do, imagine the joy we will experience when we meet our Lord on the way.